In relationships with narcissists, there is a very common misunderstanding. People believe they collapse when you leave. In reality, they don't. They are used to people coming and going, getting angry and returning, cutting contact, and then trying to talk again. What truly destabilizes them is not the act of your leaving, but the fact that you no longer need any explanation from them. Closure is often seen as a necessary step for healing. But in practice, with a narcissist, closure is not an ending. It is a final form of contact that allows them to maintain control. When you ask for closure, you are still participating in the relationship structure. You ask questions, they decide whether to answer. You wait, they retain the power to decide. Whether that conversation happens in silence, conflict, or apology, power has not truly left their hands. For this reason, narcissists do not panic when you are sad, when you accuse them, or when you try to understand what went wrong. Those reactions still give them what they need: attention, emotional feedback, and proof that they still have influence over your inner world. Even your desire to understand clearly gives them another opportunity to keep adjusting the story in ways that protect their image and ego. Everything only begins to change when you stop seeking closure. Not because you have become cold, but because you have understood that no further information from them can bring real clarity. When you no longer ask questions and no longer wait for a final conversation, the psychological bond is cut at a much deeper level than silence or formal no contact. That moment is when the narcissist truly panics, not because they lose you as a person, but because they lose the psychological function you once served. The mirror, the validator, the one who helped them maintain a sense of control. When no one needs answers from them anymore, they also lose the place where their power could operate. And that emptiness is exactly what they spend their lives trying to avoid. This video will examine why not needing closure has a stronger impact than any form of resistance. What truly happens inside the narcissist when this structure collapses, and how you can remain in that state without falling into avoidance or emotional numbness. This is not a story about revenge or victory, but about withdrawing from a psychological system where health could no longer exist. Part I: what closure is really doing in a narcissistic relationship. To understand why no longer needing closure causes a narcissist to panic, we must first face an uncomfortable truth. In this type of relationship, closure was never a healing ending. It was never designed to help you let go, but to allow the power structure of the relationship to continue existing in another form. In other words, closure does not end the bond. It transforms the bond into a subtler, harder to detect state. In healthy relationships, closure has a clear function. Two people face the reality that the relationship has ended. Each takes responsibility for their part, and the conversation even when painful moves toward psychological separation. Closure closes a loop, allowing each person to carry the experience forward without remaining emotionally bound. But in relationships with a narcissist, this logic does not exist. Closure is not used to separate, but to maintain attachment under new conditions. When you seek closure, you are still keeping the other person at the center of your life story. You are still implicitly acknowledging that they hold something important, the truth about what happened, the reason for their behavior, or the sense of fairness you believe you deserve. Psychologically, this is the crucial point. When you believe you need them to finally understand, you hand them the authority to define the meaning of an experience you yourself lived through. Whether you realize it or not, you are allowing them to continue shaping how you view the past, how you evaluate yourself, and even how you imagine future relationships. For the narcissist, this is a familiar and extremely safe position. They do not need to be honest, nor do they need to take real responsibility. As long as you still have questions, they still have power. They can choose silence to confuse you, offer vague explanations to keep you suspended in uncertainty, or display just enough remorse to keep hope alive. No matter the method, control remains in their hands. This is where closure becomes dangerous in narcissistic relationships. It creates the illusion of progress. You feel as though you are doing the right thing for healing, while in reality you are being held inside a psychological loop. Each time you think more, analyze more, or wait for a clearer conversation, you invest more energy into someone who no longer or never truly did have the capacity for a healthy relationship. More importantly, narcissists are not seeking reconciliation or genuine mutual understanding. What they seek is proof that they still affect you. As long as you need closure, you are still reacting to them. And in their psychological world, reaction is fuel. It does not matter whether that reaction is anger, sadness, or rational analysis. As long as your attention revolves around them, their internal structure remains intact. This is why so many people feel stuck long after the relationship ends. Not because they are weak or incapable of figuring it out, but because they unconsciously believe that without closure, they cannot move forward. That belief keeps them returning in thought, in memory, and in imagined conversations that never happened. And each loop silently reinforces the other person's power. What must be clearly seen is this: the narcissist does not need you to return in real life. They do not need messages, meetings, or reconciliation. What they need is for you to remain in their psychological orbit, still questioning, still seeking explanations, still allowing them to be the reference point for your emotions and perceptions. As long as that exists, the relationship, psychologically speaking, has not truly ended. Part 10. The very real reactions of a narcissist. When you stop needing closure, the moment you stop needing closure does not arrive loudly. There is no announcement, no dramatic goodbye, no final conversation. Yet the narcissist senses it almost immediately, not because they are emotionally attuned to you, but because they rely on your reactions to orient themselves. When those reactions disappear, something feels deeply wrong to them, even if they cannot yet name it. The first response is often an unexpected but ambiguous return. A short message, a casual question, a seemingly harmless opener. Are you doing okay lately? I just thought about you. There's something I want to clear up. These lines sound caring, but they are tests. They are checking whether you still need them to close the story. If you reply even politely and calmly, they know the psychological bond is still open. When soft approaches fail to elicit a response, they begin targeting your unhealed emotional layers. This is when the past is pulled out in distorted ways, recalling good moments, unfinished promises, or times when you were vulnerable. Not to heal, but to activate regret and doubt. They want you to wonder, did I miss something? Should I talk one last time to really understand? The moment you start questioning yourself, their goal is met. Another very common reaction is the half apology. Not a specific apology, not accountability, not accompanied by change, but statements that sound just mature enough to destabilize you. I wasn't perfect either. I couldn't control myself back then. I lost a lot after everything that happened. These are not meant to acknowledge your pain, but to create the feeling that closure is just within reach, if only you stay a little longer. If you still do not react, do not ask, do not engage. Narcissists often turn to provocation or disruption. They may say things that feel unfair, misrepresent you, or shift blame onto you. Not because they believe these claims, but because they want to force a response. To them, an angry person is still connected. Only someone who is silent and does not need to explain is truly dangerous. When direct methods fail, they often move indirectly. This is when you hear from others that they are really hurting, confused about why you became so cold, or just want things to be clear. These stories are told vaguely enough to make you feel responsible to speak up, explain, or end things properly. In reality, this is another way of pulling you back into the familiar role, the one responsible for their emotional state. Alongside all of this, there is one reaction that easily confuses people: performative indifference. They act as though they have moved on, no longer care, or are doing perfectly fine. But this calm does not come from letting go. It comes from control. They are watching to see whether you will return to check, to confirm, to seek closure. If you do nothing, this state rarely lasts. It is simply a pause before another attempt. What do all these reactions have in common? None of them are aimed at creating a real ending. None focus on helping you understand, heal, or move forward. They all serve one purpose: restoring the psychological role you once played, the role of the one who needs answers, the one who waits, the one who can still be influenced. When you stop needing closure, you no longer occupy those positions. You do not ask, you do not argue, you do not need their explanations to feel at peace. And this is what truly makes the narcissist panic, not because they lose you as a person, but because they lose the function you once served in their inner world. Part 3. What really happens inside a narcissist when you no longer need closure? When you stop needing closure, the first thing that collapses inside a narcissist is not emotion, but their self-orientation structure. For a long time, they have known who they are through your reactions. You ask, they answer. You are confused, they hold power. You need to understand, they become the keeper of the truth. When you step out of that position, they do not just lose you, they lose the anchor that allowed them to define themselves. At a deeper level, this creates a profoundly uncomfortable yet familiar sensation for them: nameless emptiness. Not the ordinary sadness of a breakup, but the feeling of having nothing to hold onto. No one waiting, no one needing explanations, no one reflecting back the image they are used to seeing. This void is not purely emotional, it is structural, like a room that has suddenly been stripped of all its furniture. What follows is a loss of narrative control. When you still needed closure, they had opportunities to edit, delay, or distort the truth in ways that protected their image. But when you stop asking, stop arguing, stop demanding clarity, the story is no longer in their hands. This pushes them into deep insecurity, because they no longer know what you are thinking, what you understand, or most importantly, they no longer influence how you interpret the past. That insecurity quickly turns into a quiet form of panic. It does not always appear as rage or outbursts. More often, it shows up as restlessness, obsession, or unconscious repetitive behaviors. Checking social media, seeking indirect information, replaying old conversations in their mind. These are desperate attempts to recreate the sense of control they have lost. One crucial thing must be understood. Narcissists do not panic because they realize they were wrong or lost someone important. They panic because there is no longer anyone who needs them to close the story. When there is no one playing the role of the seeker of answers, their role in the relationship disappears as well. And for a psychological structure built on roles, that disappearance feels like free fall. At this stage, what they have always avoided begins to surface, facing themselves. Not in a healthy, reflective way, but in a chaotic and disoriented one. They may feel anger without knowing why, emptiness without knowing how to fill it, or constant agitation without a clear cause. This explains why many narcissists become irritable, unstable, or compulsively distract themselves when no one needs closure from them anymore. Most importantly, when you no longer need closure, You have ended your role as a psychological container, the person who unconsciously held and regulated the parts of them they refused to face. Without you, those parts return unfiltered, unreflected, and unsoothed. And that is what makes them feel profoundly unmoored, even threatened at the deepest level. Part IV. Why not needing closure is not avoidance, but psychological maturity. One reason many people struggle to maintain a no-closure stance is because they are trapped in a deeply ingrained misconception that if you do not talk everything through, do not dialogue to the end, do not close things properly, you are avoiding emotions or have not truly healed. This belief sounds reasonable, but in the context of a narcissistic relationship, it is completely wrong. Emotional avoidance is when you dodge pain, deny what happened, or pretend to be fine while remaining internally chaotic. Not needing closure is the opposite. It only appears after you have seen clearly, felt fully, and realized that nothing more from the other person can give you real understanding. This is not emotional shutdown. It is the end of dependency. In narcissistic relationships, closure is often confused with responsibility and maturity. People are taught that adults talk things through, must be clear, must have explanations. That only applies when both sides are capable of self-reflection and accountability. When one side lacks that capacity, continuing to seek closure is no longer maturity. It becomes placing yourself in a position of weakness. Not needing closure means you have moved your center of gravity from the outside to the inside. You no longer need the person who hurt you to confirm that your pain was real. You do not need their admission of fault to feel validated. Clarity no longer comes from dialogue, it comes from stable internal awareness. A clear sign of psychological maturity is the ability to live with questions that will never be answered by others, not because you do not care, but because you understand that not every question should be asked of someone incapable of answering honestly. When you stop needing closure, you stop asking an unqualified person to explain your own experience to you. More importantly, not needing closure frees you from the loop of self-blame. Many people return seeking closure not out of love, but to ask, what did I do wrong? In narcissistic relationships, that question rarely leads to truth. It usually leads to taking on responsibility that was never yours. When you no longer need closure, you also no longer need to justify your right to leave. Part V, how to maintain a no-closure state when they come back. The hardest moment is not realizing you no longer need closure. It is when the narcissist comes back to test you. They do not return to end things clearly. They return to see whether you have truly stepped out of your old role. Maintaining this state is therefore not about willpower, but psychological discipline. The first thing you must do is redefine your goal. The goal is not to be good at not reacting, but to not return to the position of someone who needs answers. If you respond in order to explain, clarify, fix misunderstandings, or finish things properly, you have already stepped back onto the stage. The truth is, you do not need to prove that you understand or that you are okay. Your stability does not require their confirmation. Second, prepare in advance for familiar openness. Narcissists rarely say, I want you back. They use vague lines. I just want to talk a bit. I think you deserve to know this. I don't want you to misunderstand. When you hear these, ask yourself one simple question. Is this information truly necessary for my current life? If the answer is no, it is not closure, it is bait. Third, if you must respond, for practical reasons, work, children, shared circumstances, keep responses functional, unemotional, and minimal. Answer what is necessary. Do not add context. Do not revisit the past. Do not explain your motives. Narcissists live on emotional detail. When you do not provide it, the conversation naturally runs out of fuel. Another essential principle is not to argue about memories or motives. When they say, "I did that because," or "I was hurting too," do not debate right or wrong. Each argument gives them an opportunity to pull you back into the past. Instead, keep the focus on the present. The relationship has ended, and you no longer need to analyze it further. At the same time, care for the part of you that wavers. There will be days when you do not want to go back, yet still feel restless, guilty, or doubtful about your decision. This does not mean you need closure. It means your nervous system is adjusting to a new reality. Talk to safe people. Write your thoughts down, or remind yourself why you withdrew instead of returning to the person who hurt you. Finally, accept an important truth. Maintaining a no-closure stance may cause others to misunderstand you. You may be seen as cold, avoidant, or immature. But psychological maturity is not about pleasing others. It is about protecting your inner stability, even when others do not understand or agree. Part B, signs you have truly moved beyond the need for closure. One of the most common misconceptions is thinking that moving beyond the need for closure means you no longer feel anything. In reality, it is the opposite. When you truly no longer need closure, emotions can still arise: sadness, regret, even occasional anger, but they no longer control your behavior. You feel them, but you are not pushed by them to return and seek answers from the person who hurt you. The first and clearest sign is this: you no longer feel the urge to reach out when emotions surface. Before, every time the past returned, you wanted to text, to demand an explanation, to say one more thing just to finish it. Now, when a memory appears, you can pause, recognize that it is coming and going, and do nothing more. This difference is subtle, but it shows that control has returned to you. The second sign is that you no longer focus on what they think of you. You no longer ask yourself, do they understand me? Do they think I'm too cold? Do they think I'm wrong? Those questions once drove your search for closure. When they no longer take up space in your mind, it is a sign that you have stopped making the other person the reference point for your worth and your decisions. The third sign is that you no longer need to retell your story to seek validation. Before, you may have repeated the story to many people, hoping each time for a clear conclusion. Who was right? Who was wrong? Who owed what to whom? When you no longer need closure, you may still share, but you no longer need others to deliver the verdict for you. You have reached a conclusion that is stable enough within yourself. Another important sign is that you no longer wait for a dramatic moment to close the chapter. You no longer hope that one day they will apologize properly, admit everything, or finally wake up and say the words you once longed to hear. You do not deny that it could happen, but you no longer put your life on hold. If it never comes, you still live fully. The fifth sign is a shift in how you look back on the past. You no longer try to connect every detail to find a perfect logic for their behavior. You accept that some things happened not because you failed to understand enough, but because the other person lacked the capacity to behave in a healthy way. This acceptance is not bitter, it is clear. Finally, the deepest sign and the hardest one to fake is a calm that does not need to prove anything. You do not need to show them that you are okay, strong, or happy. You do not need to prove to anyone that your decision was right. Your peace is no longer reactive. It is simply the state you are living in. Part VEI. The moment power completely shifts. Power in a narcissistic relationship was never held by the person who talked more, controlled more aggressively, or appeared colder. It was always held by the person who still needed something, still needed an explanation, still needed to be understood, still needed a proper ending. And the moment you no longer need closure is the moment the axis of power quietly shifts, even if no one announces it. Before, even though you were the one hurt, you were still waiting. You waited for a conversation, an admission, a moment of clarity. That waiting placed the other person in the deciding position. They could give it to you or withhold it, choose when and choose how. But when you stop waiting, that position automatically loses meaning. Without fighting, without confrontation, power simply has nowhere left to sit. From this point on, every attempt the narcissist makes to reach you becomes reactive. Not because you are stronger, but because you are no longer participating in the game. When they text, call, provoke, or create drama, they no longer receive what once made them feel above, your reaction. And when the reaction does not come, the tactics that used to work feel out of place, even backfiring. What is unique about the moment power shifts is that it does not feel like victory. There is no gloating, no sense of "I beat them." Instead, there is something strange, lightness, quiet, and at first, a certain emptiness, because you were used to revolving around an unfinished story. When the story no longer needs to be closed through words, a gap appears, but it is the emptiness of freedom, not the emptiness of loss. At this point, the narcissist may still keep trying to pull you back, but each failure exposes them more clearly. They become repetitive, less subtle, or inconsistent in their behavior, not because they immediately become weak, but because the power structure that once held them up has disappeared. There is no longer anyone through whom they can locate their role in the relationship. Most importantly, from this moment forward, you no longer need to do anything to hold power. You do not need to maintain silence as a tactic, prove you have let go, or perform your boundaries dramatically. As long as you continue living in a state of not needing closure, everything else rearranges itself. By the end of this journey, one truth becomes very clear, even if it was difficult to accept at first. The narcissist does not panic because you leave, and not because you go silent, but because you no longer need them to close the story of your own life. When that need disappears, the relationship psychologically ends, even if no goodbye is ever spoken. Closure, as we have seen, was never a gift they could give you. It was only a hook that kept you inside a power structure that never benefited you. The moment you stop waiting for an explanation, stop hoping for a conversation that is right enough, you reclaim the authority to define your own experience. And no one can take that authority from you again. This freedom is not loud. It does not come with the feeling of victory or revenge. It comes as a very real silence, where you no longer have to ask questions of someone incapable of answering honestly. There, you do not need to prove you are fine, and you do not need others to admit you were right. You are simply no longer standing at the old door, waiting for someone to step out and explain. The most important thing to carry after all of this analysis is one certainty. You do not owe anyone a final conversation in order to move on. You do not need closure to heal. You only need enough clarity to know when you no longer need to ask. And that moment, however quiet, is the moment you have left a game the narcissist cannot play alone. If you are listening to this and realizing you no longer expect any answers from the past, understand that it does not mean you have become cold or numb. It only means you have matured enough to stop handing your inner power to someone who never knew how to protect it. And from that place, another chapter of your life begins, without an ending speech, without permission, and without anyone at the center except you.